Good evening. Once again, good evening. So again, I will continue with the same theme as last night. You know, the non-theists, or maybe if I should say it more strongly than atheists, I think in some discussions they would say, I am against religion. I am a humanist. Is this the correct pronunciation? Humanist? I am a humanist. I don't believe in religion. And I don't believe in dogma. Yes, this is what they say. And I don't think there is anything religious about emptiness, that there is nothing dogmatic about emptiness. Emptiness is beyond dogma. It is beyond religion in the sense or in the way religion is interpreted or understood by the so-called atheists. How can one be dogmatic if one realizes emptiness? If you know dogma itself is empty, then why would you hold on to it? Why would you be swayed or influenced by a strong dogmatic feeling or perception? Because it is empty, right? What is the point of being so dogmatic? What is the point of holding on to your views rigidly? That only happens because one doesn't understand emptiness. Just as emptiness is beyond conception, it is also beyond all dogmas. When we try to meditate on emptiness, when we try to think of emptiness, I think many of us, we use this approach, the same approach that we would use when trying to learn about some of the things that we learn at school or at universities, We take a very straightforward, direct approach to emptiness. And I don't know if that is the right way. Instead, when we try to understand emptiness, then we begin by not directing our mind towards emptiness, but rather we look at the objects around us. We use those objects, the objects that we are most familiar with. We think about them, and we then inquire, what really is that object that we are so familiar with? Of course, if you have not utilized this way of investigating or inquiry, then up to that point, we may feel that we know this or those other objects, we feel them, but we haven't really thought thoroughly about their existence or how they appear to us or what it really is. What is it? We never ask those questions. We are satisfied merely with those labeling, right? Merely with those perceptions. We just accept as they are and then go on with our lives, right? Whereas to understand emptiness, you take on those objects and then start asking those questions. So like in the classical text, in the classical example, we always use ourselves as the object of investigation. So, who am I or what am I? Where is this I, right? As we look, then the I has so many layers of identification. On the most gross level, we identify ourselves as being somewhat physical, right? So on the physical level. And then once we peel away that layer, then we have our feelings, the sensations. And if you again peel that off, then you have the perceptions. You peel that off, then you have the other mental formations, and you peel that layer off, and then you have consciousness itself, because you are always conscious, right? We are always conscious. And beyond consciousness, then we come to a dead end. Once you peel away, first the physical forms, and then the feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and then when you come to consciousness, then you cannot go beyond that, because investigation in this manner is, of course, being conscious of something, and you cannot go beyond that. It's like saying, try imagining that you're in deep, deep sleep, or try to imagine that you have no imagination, or like saying, try to be conscious of the fact that you don't have any consciousness. So you come to a dead stop, when you come down to consciousness. So with this investigation, up till this point, we have not touched on the subject of emptiness. We were all looking at conventional existence. We are all looking at conventional objects. So with this investigation, then when you peel away those layers of I, then what was once a solid object is now something that you are struggling to find, that you are now struggling to point at it, you're struggling to feel it. If it is so physical, then it should at least be tangible, but now you cannot, it's lost, You look within those 5 aggregates, you're not finding what you thought you would find. With mental delusions, with mental afflictions, anger and attachment, they arise after going through a thought process. They don't arise out of nothing. They don't arise out of nothing. They don't arise automatically. There is a thought process that projecting out some qualities, unrealistic qualities. From that, these emotions arise. Anger, it projects unrealistic, unpleasant qualities onto the object. Attachment then projects out an unrealistic, pleasantly existing quality or property onto the object. So this is why that only with emptiness will you be able to overcome those two emotions, overcome ignorance. If you take emptiness out of the context of how to overcome ignorance, emptiness by itself is like any other concept. It's just another philosophy, It's just another philosophical viewpoint. It's just one of those abstracts. It is how it is used that really gives it that importance, that gives it weight. If you only think of emptiness as something to satisfy your intellectual hunger, then emptiness will only be good for that. It can only satisfy you for the time being. And then, after a while, you will become tired of emptiness, and then you will have another dogma, and another thing to sort of stimulate your senses. But if you can link emptiness, the concept of emptiness, and how it is related in overcoming those three destructive afflictions, then there really is a meaning behind emptiness. There really is a purpose in trying to adapt this seemingly abstract notion into one's life. By looking indirectly at emptiness, then you get a hunch that something is lacking. But as soon as you point your mind towards emptiness, then emptiness fades away, and in its place, then you see a solid object, right? So, again, there's this challenge. And with conceptual thoughts, with our understanding, we can try to think of emptiness, and we may be right in our understanding of emptiness. And when we are thinking of emptiness, of course we need to use something as the basis and then think such and such is empty. This is how we think. And at that moment, when we are using an object and then thinking this is empty of an intrinsic property, we are again projecting that emptiness, the emptiness of whatever it is that we have used as the object of emptiness. We are projecting the emptiness of that object as being true, right? Even though we are not seeing the object as being true because we are seeing it as being empty, yet we are seeing the emptiness of that object as being true, as if it really has this existence from its side. So, but again, to combat that, if you think the emptiness of that object is again empty, again you will have the same problem, right? Then the emptiness of that object will again appear as true. So this is, I think, one understanding of emptiness is beyond conceptual thoughts. And then with conceptual thoughts, any conceptual thoughts, if there is one emptiness that cannot be conceptualized by conceptual thoughts, then it is its own emptiness. The emptiness of that subjective experience can never be known by that subjective conceptual thought. So it would be impossible for a conceptual thought to realize its own ultimate nature. It can, of course, conceptualize an external object. It can conceptualize the emptiness of an external object, but it cannot conceptualize its own nature. So, again, these are all little parts of why emptiness is beyond concepts. So with conceptual thoughts, then you're getting a limited view of emptiness, There are many limitations. Since this is not a teaching on heartsutra per se, I will just draw on some verses from the heartsutra. So the first is, form is emptiness. This is a very profound statement. It's a profound teaching. Many would have problem digesting the meaning of this sentence. Form is emptiness. They would say, form is, how can it be emptiness? How can it be empty? It is real. There really is a form. Is it not so? Of course, the person is correct that form does exist, but the person is correct to a certain point, right? Form does exist. The Buddha is not denying that. Form does exist. But does it exist in the way that we perceive it? Does it exist? Does it exist in all the aspects that we perceive it? Those questions are difficult to answer, and if you can answer those questions, then you can answer the meaning of form is emptiness. When we say form is empty, the teachings, then we are saying that form does not have any unique quality that does not depend, that is independent of causes and conditions, that it doesn't have an intrinsic quality. We are simply saying that, and that should not be misunderstood. Form does not have an intrinsic nature. But then one could say, okay, the conventional truths are not form's intrinsic nature. I can agree with that. But how about the emptiness of form? Isn't that intrinsic? Isn't that intrinsic nature of form? And this is precisely why the Buddha did not only talk about forms, the five aggregates and those other objects as being empty, but he also said emptiness itself is empty. Right? Emptiness itself is empty. Because if you talk about many empty things, and if you don't talk about emptiness as being one of those things, then it's very easy to misunderstand and take emptiness as being the intrinsic nature. And then what does intrinsic nature mean anyway? What does ultimate truth mean anyway? So again, we have to go back to how we interpret those terms. Because I think sometimes we come across texts that says emptiness is intrinsic, right? Emptiness is real. Emptiness is the ultimate existence. We come across those statements, but then on the other hand, we also talk of emptiness as being empty. So this term, ultimate, they can have different connotations. So one must then be able to differentiate those. Just as if one were to investigate the ultimate nature of form, and at the end of the investigation, at the end of that inquiry, one would not find form. Instead, one would find that form is empty. So one finds the emptiness of form. Likewise, if one was to inquire the ultimate nature of the emptiness of form, at the end of that inquiry, one wouldn't find the emptiness of form, but rather that the emptiness of form itself is empty. So it is the emptiness of form, right? That much is similar, but what is different is that form is not considered ultimate reality, whereas emptiness of form is considered ultimate reality. Why is that so? Because the emptiness of form is found at that investigation, whereas form is not found at the end of that investigation. So this is what we mean by when we say emptiness is ultimate truth, but it does not exist by way of being ultimate truth. nothing exists truly. There is no truly existing object. Right? So that is one term that if we are not careful, then it might create some confusion. So differences between ultimate truth and existing in an ultimate way. And then the second one is emptiness is form, right? Emptiness is form. So essentially what it means is that because of emptiness, therefore form exists. Because of emptiness, form exists. Because form is empty, therefore form exists. If form was not empty, it wouldn't exist. Why? Because it wouldn't have anything that causes it to be born or to come into being. If it was not empty, it wouldn't have a cause. And without causes, effects don't come. And then the next two statements, emptiness is not other than form, and form is not other than emptiness. It explains the union of the two truths. Emptiness, which is the ultimate truth, and form, which is a conventional existing object, that they are inseparable. They are united. And this brings us to dependent origination. Things are empty of an intrinsic quality, yet they exist. So, what is the conclusion? It is, of course, dependent arising. That all phenomena are a union. They are an union of these two truths. They are empty, and at the same time, they arise out of causes and conditions. Now, when it comes to the subject of dependent arising, then there are again many different levels of understanding dependent origination. But first I would like to ask the audience, of course we would be having a question and answer session, so those of you who would like to ask questions, can you please raise your hands? Okay, we have one question. Okay, that's it. Okay, just one question. All right. Is that all? Okay. One more? Okay, so two questions. So I'm asking that if you are planning to ask questions, now is the time to raise your hand. Okay, so, all right. Okay, one more, 3. We have, okay, 4. Okay. Okay, we have 4 questions.
Hello, Rinpoche. Thank you for your talk. I would just like to request if you could please explain again how emptiness is form, but using a concrete example to show us. For example, like say if we are talking about anger, how would emptiness be formed? Can you use a concrete example to explain it?
that if, in the Heart Sutra, it's very clear. It makes those statements, right? Emptiness is form, and then you apply it to the rest of the four aggregates, so it becomes emptiness is feelings, emptiness is perceptions, emptiness is mental formations, emptiness is consciousness. One could ask, isn't that contradicting, right? That sounds contradicting. How can emptiness be all of those things at once? It's like saying emptiness is permanent, emptiness is impermanent, right? That would be contradicting. Instead, we should not take that statement literally, and we should not, of course, think, it says in the Heart Sutra, emptiness is form, therefore emptiness must be form, right? And if you take it very literally, then it becomes, well, how can emptiness be form? And then at the same time, how can it be a non-physical entity and also be a physical entity simultaneously? That's just not possible. It defies the logic of opposites, How can it be a physical and then how can it be a physical? How can it be a physical object and then also be a non-physical object? Because it is also consciousness. You could also think like this. So again, when we say form is emptiness, then rather we should draw on the meaning, and then the meaning which is because emptiness is, because form is empty, therefore form has a place. It has its position as being form, right? Because of its unique causes that it doesn't share with the other non-forms. Whether if form were to be non-empty, then it wouldn't have to rely on those unique causes which causes it to be a form in the first place. So if you think like this, then I think it makes it more easier to take that statement. In your question, I think there was a very important word you used, which is, of course, concrete. This is a very important word. What does concrete mean? Yeah? Doesn't concrete apply something strong, right? Something strong, something solid, something really out there, that's so independent of our subjective experience. And so we must always think how we approach how we use our mind to interpret things, because many times we are constantly, I think, interpreting, but we don't realize it. But we are always interpreting. We are trying to read faces, that's a form of interpretation, right? Whenever we walk, we meet people, or we see a building and we interpret, we interpret the people living in the building based on the building that they're in, which is, I think, quite absurd, So we are always interpreting, and we are always trying to come to a conclusion. Sometimes, I think, too early, we just want to get the conclusion very quickly. We are always trying to take the shortcut. We are trying to take the expressway. Is that what you call it here? Expressway? Yes. So you have many expressways here, right? Expressways. Is that right? Expressways? But not in India. We don't have expressways. So we have to take the long way. Okay, so Shall we begin with the next one? How to be
Disciples of different facilities not be attached to the six senses and its corresponding objects in order to be free
from suffering.
free from samsara.
Okay.
To be free from samsara and to realize emptiness of the five aggregates.
Okay. Okay.
应该是这样吧。very cheap。这个说的吧，我发现这么辛苦，这个不累了。
Yes. Good question. And again, the answer, I think, of course, lies in emptiness, right? But again, when we have when our understanding of emptiness is not strong enough, then obviously we cannot use our understanding of emptiness to overcome our attachment to the sensual pleasures. So I think then it's better that we use some other techniques to do that. And then I think one thing is that it is again, on your part, it requires you to use some inquiry, right? Because if you don't inquire, if you don't think rationally, then there's no way that you can decrease those instinctive emotions. There's no way that you can overcome those emotions. It takes, on your part, it takes some level of reasoning, some level of thinking beyond the senses. So it requires you to, of course, think more deeper. Not just look at the surface, because the five pleasures, they're just the surface, right? But try to look beyond that. This is very important. And then thinking, like as it is mentioned in the Lamrim, thinking of the drawbacks of not going against, not challenging those instincts, the drawbacks of those, or the cons of not facing up to attachment or desire, and then thinking that we have been repeating this process of enjoying the pleasure, enjoying the sensual pleasures so many times. And then now if you ask yourself, am I again going to devote some of my precious time again in pursuit of worldly pleasures? And what would be the outcome? Maybe a few moments of what we call happiness. And then, is that happiness everlasting? How long does it have an expiry date, right? It does, and it's like one of those things that you have to open. Once opened, you have to use in 3 days, and then it expires. It's not like you can use forever. So they always have an expiry date. This happiness. So you have to ask this question to yourself, whether you are going to devote so much time, so much energy for just a few moments of pleasure, and then again you repeat the whole process and then work towards that again, and then again and again, endlessly. Whether you want to do that or you want to get this other type of pleasure or happiness that doesn't require you to pursue those goals and then make all those devote all of your time for those things. There isn't another way. Whether there isn't another way or not, this you have to first ask yourself. Ask yourself. And then, of course, looking at examples, I think, would help in finding the answer or inspiring you to start challenging those natural mental afflictions. This is very important. Now, this is for someone, of course, whose understanding of emptiness is not so inspiring. If your understanding of emptiness is not inspiring, if it doesn't gives you that push to practice the Dharma sincerely, then it's better that you find other ways to first at least get you motivated, to practice the Dharma. At least get you motivated so that you would look at the other side, not this life, not the pleasures of this life. So this is very important, to find anything that inspires you, to find anything that motivates you, and of course to always think about the negative aspects of this life's pleasures. The reason why we pursue those is that we always look at the good aspect of those things. We don't want to look at the negative aspects, because we know that if you overlook that, then you are in a way sort of denying all those pleasures. This is what we are thinking. But again, we need to find a way of overcoming that thinking. So you need to sort of find the right logic to fight that other logic that we are using, right? So I think there are many ways, but we need to find the one that suits for us. We need to find our own way of dealing with those emotions, with those attachments. This is very important. That I cannot say, this is the one, this is for everyone. I'm not like a doctor, I cannot prescribe this medicine for everyone, Everyone would have to find their own medicine. This is what the Buddha said, that he's just going to show us the path and we need to make that medicine for us. It's not like he gives us the medicines and then he says, you take this, take this, take this. No, that he shows us all the different ingredients, and accordingly, because we know our emotions, because we know ourselves more than anyone knows us, right? So utilize what we know, because it's almost like most of what you know, most of your knowledge is not used, right? I think the scientists say something like that we use only a few percentage of our brain power, something like that. So we know a lot about ourselves, more than we think we know, but it is just that we don't sort of dwell on those subjects. We don't sort of invoke those hidden knowledge. But if you can do that, if you look for a way, then you will find the way to fight, to overcome those destructive emotions. And then one way, of course, to overcome those attachment for the pleasures of this life is, of course, thinking, as it is mentioned in the Lamrim, thinking about the precious human rebirth, how we have this precious human rebirth. Being reborn in this form is an opportunity in itself, where we can ask questions. Other forms of life, they seem to be mostly, they are driven by the five senses. But we, on the other hand, we can utilize the sixth sense. We can use reasoning. So this is a huge advantage that others don't have, but only we have. And and we have a very balanced lifestyle, So it gives us an opportunity to think thoroughly. If we are constantly suffering so much, then it gives no time to think about Dharma. And if we are constantly enjoying the pleasures, worldly pleasures all the time, again, it gives us we won't be able, why would we think about Dharma if we are always happy, right? So we have a healthy mix of suffering and temporary happiness, which gives us an opportunity to think about the Dharma and think about what happens next, And then, of course, thinking about impermanence is very important, because if we don't think about impermanence, then we are always planning for the future, We will always be planning for the future, always planning more nice events, more pleasurable events, more pleasurable experiences. We'll always look forward to those. So again, thinking on impermanence is very useful in overcoming those attachments, and when we say impermanence, to say it very clearly, it means death. That this is what impermanence means in this context, that we need to think about death, and not only death is inevitable, but that when it happens, no one knows, right? So thinking of death then sort of changes our plan for the future. Then it sort of makes us think about the Dharma, and then thinking about the uncertainty of when death would happen, of course, then brings in us a sense of urgency to practice the Dharma now, at the soonest, sooner rather than later. So, of course, I think we can, Lamrim is so practical that there are so many practical teachings that we can incorporate in our lives, so that we can make our time on this planet meaningful, so that we can then make sure that this precious opportunity, is not put to waste. This is important. I think we are all afraid of death, which is good. But then we don't need to be so afraid of death, because death is a new beginning, right? Death is a new beginning. So you should be afraid of it, but don't be too afraid of it. It should be the right balance. Good enough, you are afraid of it enough to get you to practice the Dharma, but you're not too afraid of it that you just become very, very negative. So this should again be, I think, balanced.
Hello. Basically, if I understand, the heartsutra in a nutshell is saying that you are going from the shore of suffering to the shore of nirvana, the or the unborn stage. Question 1. Is that achieved through the practice of profound wisdom and realization of deep emptiness? Is deep emptiness, what has deep emptiness to do with our human nature? Because everything exists because there is emptiness. Without emptiness, nothing exists in this world. So can I say that emptiness in some way is Buddha nature? Buddha nature is emptiness. And how we can reach the stage of profound wisdom to have dateless stage? Because if emptiness exists because things exist because of emptiness, then we exist because the emptiness, we apply thought to it. And that is the start of everything. So how to reach the thoughtless state?
Okay. Buddha nature and emptiness, I think we have to differentiate between those two. for example, the emptiness of let's say the emptiness of the first two truths. They are emptiness, but they are not considered Buddha nature, right? Buddha nature is the emptiness.
So if Buddha nature part of emptiness part of Buddha nature, but not emptiness.
No, emptiness by itself, by definition, is not Buddha nature. All Buddha natures are emptiness. All emptiness are not Buddha nature. Yeah? Yes. For an example, so I was just saying that, for example, the emptiness of the first two truths, right? The emptiness of suffering and the emptiness of the origin of suffering, they are emptiness. They are ultimate natures of those two respective objects, but they are not considered Buddha nature. What is Buddha nature? Buddha nature is the emptiness of the tainted mind, right? So, the mind of a sentient being, the mind of a sentient being, the emptiness of the mind of a sentient being is Buddha nature, Tadagata Garbha, right? So, that's Buddha nature. And then your second part of your question is, how does one achieve Buddhahood through emptiness, right?
Is Buddhahood achieved through the perfection of wisdom?
Yes, of course.
That
Yes,
is the only
Buddhahood is achieved through the perfection of wisdom. So, not all, again, we have to differentiate. Wisdom means the right view. The right view, the correct view of emptiness, that is wisdom. When that is perfected, in other words, when that wisdom is free from all levels of obscurations, that is the perfected wisdom, right? And of course, when your wisdom is free from all levels of obscurations, that's when you become a Buddha. So yes, through the perfection of wisdom, one attains Buddhahood, and the perfection of wisdom is the only way to Buddhahood. Now, if I may add, perfection of wisdom has again two connotations. It is the wisdom that is perfecting itself, or that is perfecting when we say perfection of wisdom, it could lead to the cause of perfection of wisdom, which is the perfecting process of wisdom, and then it could mean the result or the effect of that process, which is the wisdom that is perfected, right? So again, we have to differentiate between those. So for an example, the path of seeing or the path of meditation of the Bodhisattva Bhumi would be considered the wisdom that is being perfected, right? And then at the end of those process, at the end of all those meditative stages, when that wisdom that sees emptiness is free from all types of obscurations, then that is the perfected wisdom, the effect, perfection wisdom. And then the path of seeing and the path of meditation of the Bodhisattva Bhumi would be considered the causal perfection of wisdom.
So this perfection of wisdom also requires deep concentration.
Excuse me?
This perfection of wisdom also needs to practice deep concentration.
Of course, yes. So concentration, I think, comes maybe it starts from the path of accumulation, and then with concentration, with insight, when you bring those two, when you bring the union of concentration, of single-pointed concentration, and of insight in context with emptiness, then that's when you make the transformation from the first path to the second path. Can you wait a minute? Could you give the gentleman the mic? I think he has something to share.
Actually, this question of how to reduce our sensation needs always
Can you
arise.
hold it closer?
This question of how to reduce our sensation needs always arise. Actually, it also depends on how strong your motivation or salvation needs is. If your salvation needs is very strong, you can ignore a lot many needs. If your salvation needs is half-hearted, you will have problem trying to reduce the other body needs.
You are
anger needs.
absolutely correct.
So this is very important.
Yes.
So you practice Dharma, either practice full-hearted or not half-hearted. You get nowhere.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. That's correct.
Thank you. Thank you, Rinpoche. I actually have a question on the Heart Sutra. So, I had the good fortune to receive teachings on the Heart Sutra from His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who said that in the Sanskrit and the Tibetan translations at the beginning, there's the Kyangdra, right? The Arya Avalokiteshvara saw that the five aggregates are also empty of inherent existence. But in the Chinese translation, there's no also. And His Holiness has said that there's actually a lot of meaning contained within that also. And I'm a bit confused about that. What I seem to remember from the teaching was that as opposed to the Shravaka, the Nyentu, they meditate on the emptiness or the selflessness of the person, but here the Bodhisattva, Avalokiteshvara, also meditates on the emptiness of the phenomena or selflessness of the phenomena. Yes, something like this, right? However, since this is a Prajaparamita Sutra of the Telgyuwa, the consequentialists, the Prasangika Majjhimika, who hold that there is no difference in the subtlety of the object of negation between selflessness of person and selflessness of phenomena, then wouldn't those Shravakas also meditate on the emptiness of the five aggregates, as is also mentioned in, for example, the Ratnavali by Nagarjuna, Jisi Pumpo Zempa. Yeah. Oh, yes. So as long as there's clinging to the true existence of the aggregates, that long there will be clinging to the true existence of the person. So that shows that the Shravakas also would realize the selflessness of the person. Selflessness of person and phenomena. So if that's the case, then what is the also this Kyangdra in the Heart Sutra getting at?
I think that Shravakas, of course, Shravakas, they know both the selflessness of the person and the aggregate. Now, did His Holiness say that this Kyangdra has got to do with how the Shravakas know emptiness? Did His Holiness made that connection?
I seem to remember something like this.
Oh.
Right, that it has a lot of meaning. That since it's it's showing how the bodhisattvas train, right? So it's not just meditating on the selflessness of the person, but also the phenomena.
How I understand the
Yes.
Kyangdra, I think it is alluding to the fact that not only are the five aggregates are empty of this inherently existing property, but also the rest of the other denominations, other categories of phenomena are also empty of this inherently existence. This is my understanding of the Kyangdra, right? With the other part of your question, I agree that Shravakas also they know the selflessness of both the person and the aggregates. Yes. And I don't think I still answered your question. But I think maybe you're asking a more deeper question. Well, you can translate what I just said, and I will ask. I think this is what His Holiness meant, that there's a word, kyang. This is a Tibetan clause, and it's something like not only that. This is what it sort of means. So I don't remember His Holiness's teachings so detailed, but with what Venerable said, then I think, well, this is just my theory, my hypothesis. So I think what His Holiness was saying, that the Sharvakas and the Praditya Buddhas, because they are working, they want to attain liberation for themselves. Therefore, they don't, even though they know emptiness, they don't know emptiness by way of countless reasoning, right? They don't realize emptiness by way of countless reasoning, whereas the Bodhisattvas, because they are aspiring for liberation not only for themselves but for all the sake of others, therefore it is important that they know not only is the understanding of emptiness is sufficient, but they should know it from many different viewpoints. They should know it from many different viewpoints. Therefore, this Tibetan word kyang differentiates between the understanding, the realization of emptiness of the Bodhisattva and the non-Bodhisattvas. So this is perhaps what His Holiness was pointing to. But this is again just something that I'm picking up on, but I'm not so sure of it. But yeah, so that's that. So this is where we stop, and I appreciate all the questions. I appreciate your interest in the Dharma, and particularly in the Pranjaparamita Sutra. This is very important. When we go to the teachings, our gurus, they always say the same thing. Don't just have faith, but also learn the Dharma. Don't just learn the Dharma, but then contemplate on Dharma. Don't just contemplate, but try to habituate yourself with that. Try to internalize those wisdoms. So let us all try to do that, and let us try to do all those three, not for our own benefit, but so that we can try to perhaps decrease the suffering of others. So please let us all join in the dedications.
But Rinpoche, first we would like to present Thanksgiving Mandala.
No need. We just go straight to dedication. It's more important. Yes.
Okay.